Thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is our final Wellness by the Water Cooler for 2024, which is exciting and hard to believe, but yeah, really cool. We've had a really successful series with all of these, a huge range of different topics. And today we're joined by the wonderful Danielle Owen Whitford, the CEO and founder of Pioneera. We're going to be talking about end of year exhaustion, end of year, how to conserve your end of year energy, and a little bit about burnout as well. Before I get into what we're here to talk about today and introduce Danielle properly, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we're all joining from today. I am joining from Gadigal land, so I'd like to pay my respect to elders past and present, and also acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. Please feel free to jump into the chat and let us know where you're joining from today. We'd love to sort of see all the range of places that people are joining us from. And so, as I said, I'm joined today by Danielle Owen Whitford, CEO and founder of Pioneera. Danielle is a former corporate executive and moved into startups in 2018. A boundary pusher throughout her career, she's constantly challenged the notion of we can't do it differently, so we live with what we have. Using technology and curiosity to create a new normal, Danielle founded startup Pioneera to tackle the crippling issue of workplace burnout, using the simplest of approaches, our words and our behaviour. And Pioneera's AI platform combines technology with psychology to improve team performance and supports managers to create a high-performance environment. Having her own personal and professional experience and expertise in burnout, it seemed a perfect fit to have Dan join us today to talk about this particular issue, specifically, as I said, within the context of end-of-year pressures. So our sort of official title for today is The Human Side of Year-End Success, Balancing Performance and Wellbeing. We didn't want to just sort of go straight into talking too much directly about burnout. I think that a lot of people would know a little bit about burnout. You know, our audience here today have come to, I believe, many of our sessions before. So most people here are familiar with the concept of burnout, but we really want to look at it through the lens of end of year. I know myself, I'm starting to feel that sort of limp to the finish line, and I'm sort of ready to have this conversation and learn more about how I can conserve my energy and set myself up for a meaningful break. Not everybody has a break at the end of the year. Certainly there's many professions that don't get a break, but hopefully there's at least a few days where you can take some time, and this session can help you learn about that. So welcome, Danielle.
Thank you, Steph. Great to be with you. And hello, everyone. We're also coming to you live from Gadigal land, down the road from Steph, I think.
Yeah, not too far. And also, as we go through this session, I should have probably started with this. This session is being recorded, and we will be sending around a recording for everybody who has registered tomorrow. And also feel free to jump into the chat and let us know. Feel free to let us know who you are. You know, what is your role in the workplace that you're joining from, so that we know, you know, who our audience is. And you can also jump in and ask questions along the way. My colleague will be in the chat to sort of jump in and answer any sort of housekeeping chats that might come up. And then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. And we're trying to treat this quite conversational. So if we have time throughout, we will as well. So let's get straight into it. Why don't we start by reflecting on, I guess, this time of year, as I've said. Why do you think that this time of year can be a time where people feel more overwhelmed than usual?
I think as we get to the end of the year, we put a false deadline in of Christmas, and we want everything to be done by that point. So from a, I guess, neuroscience perspective, as soon as you put a deadline in place, your brain from a GPS perspective, like, wants to get to that deadline in the most efficient way. So I think we squeeze a lot into the end of the year to be able to finish the year and feel like we've achieved something. So that's, I think, the first thing that's going on. I think the second thing is it's the end of the year. So most people don't get much of a break throughout the year. They kind of save it up, because in Australia, we love to take January off and come back after Australia Day. So a lot of people have saved their holidays. They haven't had a break. They haven't had a charge to sort of reset and relax. Also, we can't ignore the fact that, you know, what's happening socially. So economic times are tough for a lot of people. There's wars going on around the world. There's presidential elections. Like, there's a lot happening right now. So it feels very turbulent. It feels very chaotic. And then that feels unsafe to us because as human beings, we like safety and structure. So I think all of that is coming together. And from a leader's perspective, not only are we trying to support ourselves through that, but we have the added responsibility and expectation of supporting others. So there's that layer as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really interesting that sort of arbitrary Christmas deadline. I mean, I'm part of it too, and it's not just in the work context. It's like, let's catch up before Christmas. I have to see all my friends and family between now and Christmas Day, but yet, there's all this time after that when we could also catch up, and the work will still be there when I come back, and it's sort of like, okay, actually starting to think about maybe this is a 2025 thing as opposed to it must be done in order for me to relax. That sort of mental deadline and that sort of self-imposed deadline is really interesting. The other piece that I was reflecting on when we were preparing for this session around this time of year, of course, the financial wellbeing component is really difficult. It's an expensive time of year, and there's a lot of, emotion and feelings, and there's a loadedness to that financial wellbeing around people internalizing shame of how much can I buy for my kids, what kind of lunch can I put on for my family, or, I can't attend every Christmas party because it's going to cost me money, all of that as well, and the emotions that get stirred up. But also this time of year, if any significant life event has happened this year for you, whether it's the loss of a loved one, it could be a relationship breakdown, or it could be something maybe less extreme as well. If you've had a difficult year in some regard, it'll sort of poke its sort of little head up again at that Christmas time as well. It makes everything feel more palpable. So it is a more intense time of year as we limp to that finish line. But thinking back, about the workplace and the kinds of people who do attend these events and these webinars that we put on, and speaking about the leader, what advice would you give from a leadership perspective? So how can leaders look after themselves? Because we know that's really important. We put a lot of expectation onto our leaders to support everybody else. But what are some tangible takeaways that leaders could really do to support their teams and themselves and to role model that good behaviour?
Yeah, well, I think you've hit the nail on the head because leaders are role models. So I always talk to people about leading by example because people will do what you do rather than do what you say. So I think it starts with you. So my sort of advice to leaders at this time of year is prioritize what's really genuinely important for you to do at the end of the year versus what you can pick up next quarter. Because the beginning of next year is just next quarter. It's not like it's 5 years away and on another galaxy or something like that. So be really I think focused on what you need to achieve. If you have an end of financial year and you need to get stuff done by 31st of December, of course you need to, prioritize that stuff. But be clear from a work perspective. What do you need to achieve before the end of the year? What does your team need to achieve before the end of the year? Because we do only have 3 weeks. And then make sure the tasks line up to that. And anything that doesn't line up to that, move to January or February and be really transparent with people. This is important for us to do, and we'll pick it up next year. I'm doing the same thing with my team. So I think that's the first thing that's really important is prioritizing for yourself and for the team what is critical to get done, not as what nice to have, but what's critical to have. And then secondly, make sure the tasks line up to that. The third thing is, I think, be reasonable and practical about what you can actually achieve and how much time is required, because we're getting into a busy time of year. Even if you have Christmas parties or not, you're mentally starting to think about having a break. So you might be hanging out with family or you might be hanging out with friends. It's getting warmer. You might be walking around outside. So we don't have 24 hours a day to work anymore. Not that we ever should, but our priorities between work and outside of work start to get a little bit challenged around this time of year. So be practical on what you can achieve. And the third thing I'd say to leaders is be super transparent about what you're doing for yourself. So if you're for example, I've started exercising. I didn't exercise a lot before COVID, and then COVID kind of knocked that off the head. And I know it's been years, but it took me a while to get back into it. So I'm clear with my team, this is what I've done. I've gone and I've exercised, or I've gone for a walk, or I'm going to down tools, call me tomorrow if you need me, or I'm off at a training course because I'm trying to get this. So be really transparent about what you're doing to make sure that you set yourself up for the end of year. You're prioritizing. You're only working on the important tasks. You're rejigging timelines if you need to. I think those things will help you and your team finish the year with something that they're proud of. I'd like to the leaders get to the end of the year and say, look, I'm really proud of what we achieved, not, oh my God, I just made it.
Thank God it's over. Yeah.
Thank God it's over. I just made it. And same with the team. And
Mm.
I mean, you're probably in the same position, Steph, but I can't tell you how many people I speak to that just can't wait for the year to be over.
Yeah.
Scrolling to the finish line, like, oh, that's
Mm.
sad. You want to
Yeah.
celebrate that you've achieved some great things. So I think those three things will help set leaders up.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And I think what I'm thinking of as you speak there is around psychological safety and how prioritizing and building, fostering psychological safety throughout the year, or on an ongoing basis over the years, so that you can create an environment where people can speak up if they are starting to feel like they're limping to the finish line or have a level of exhaustion. And sort of my sort of personal experience of that is just yesterday I had a conversation with my leader, shout out to Nat, who's probably online, about how I am feeling really, really starting to feel that exhaustion. It's not burnout, but it is that level of exhaustion. I do feel like it's going to be a long few weeks to get to that break. And I took a bit of a risk, I suppose, saying that, because I thought, I'm being a bit vulnerable. But the reason I was able to do that is because over, working alongside that leader, we've established that sense of psychological safety so that I could share that. And I said, I don't actually need anything from you. I just want you to know where I'm at, so that if I am a little bit slow on the emails, or, and almost give me that inherent permission to slow it down a little bit and support me to prioritize things. And I think, so my advice is, as a leader, focus on building psychological safety all of the time, not just this time of year, but, it's never too late to start. And as a non-leader, take a risk and share with your leader if you do think that there's a little bit of that safety there, because you'll probably find they're pretty open to that conversation and would rather you look after your energy and support you in prioritizing what's important, instead of doing things for the sake of doing more work or being seen or perceived to be doing a lot. That sort of presenteeism type situation.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, that's great. That takes great courage. So good on you for doing that. That's a good thing. I think the other thing I would say to anyone wanting to do this is, I think what you did, Steph, that was really clever, is you were clear with, I don't need you to solve this for me.
Yeah.
I just want to, and so I see this quite a bit, and I have my team sometimes come to me and I'm like, okay, what would you like me to do here? Sometimes it's just, you go, okay, I'm going to listen. Sometimes they actively need some help in solving whatever it is. And sometimes it's just feedback to the leader, go, oh, hang on, we have to slow down on a couple of these things because this is how people are feeling. So it takes great courage. So if you're in a position that you do feel safe to speak up, 100% do it. If you don't feel in that position, that's okay. There's no pressure to do it. Think about other ways that you can get support from your team. And a really good way of doing that is actually saying, which one of these two tasks is more critical? Hello, Linda, I've got these two things to do before the end of the year. Which one would you like me to prioritize and focus on? And a nice way of saying, I'm going to do this before the end. And then you can go, okay, great. So I'll get this one done before the end of the year. Pick this one up in January. So you kind of almost facilitate a prioritization conversation with your leader.
I like that because, it's making it very much about the work rather than the person. It's being very direct and clear, but also, giving that message that I can't do both. And so, which is, and communicating that. So it's a good sort of different way of saying that as well. Yeah, that's really good. So sort of to that point, we are starting to hear that phrase, and I'm certainly starting to say it, is that, that's a future me problem, or, that I'll do it next year, which essentially is adding to my, return to work list, which is not the end of the world either. But what kind of, I guess, strategies do you recommend in terms of that wind down, and to facilitate the wind down to the end of the year, and also to ensure a smooth and not overwhelming return to work in 2025?
Yeah, I don't like that notion of that's a future me problem, because it's you. It's still you. It's a you problem now. It's
and it's only 3 weeks away.
Yeah, and all you're doing is mentally, you're setting yourself up to come back and be scared, right? If you're saying future me problem, you're attaching yourself to a problem in the future. So I have heard that too. I'm not a massive fan of that. I think because all you're doing is pushing out the inevitable. What I would encourage you to do is take a little bit more time to say, well, how do I prioritize that? And so you're really clear. It's not a future me problem to solve. You're solving the problem now by saying, I'm doing this here and I'm doing that there. January is just another month. It's like going, well, how do I go from February to March, or how do I go from July to August? Well, you take what you didn't do July and you put it into August. It's exactly the same. It's just that we mentally, because we've got this little
Yeah.
between freak out. So I would just do the same. I would be clear on what do I need to do this month and what can I do next month after. But make sure that you've communicated that really clearly to your colleagues. And if you're a leader, you've communicated that to your team, and you make sure you communicate that up to your leader, because what you don't want to do is set your future self up for being in trouble. But it's like any time of the year is what I would say. Just make sure that you're prioritizing effectively. And you're clear with people on what you've done.
It's sort of finding that balance between, because you're right, December to January is like going from March to April. It's just the next month with a little bit of a break in between. And the great thing about it is that a lot of people, and again, not everyone, does have that break in between. So as opposed to when you might go on a holiday in the middle of the year and you feel like you need to be on emails, often at the end of December and early January, there is a fairly universal sort of downtime. And again, not everywhere. So you might not be as compelled to check emails because the whole business might be on leave, or your clients or your stakeholders are on leave as well. So it is nice in that way. So it's sort of important to remember it's just the next month. But equally, I think there is something very cleansing and, I'm trying to think of the right word, but I guess useful to really see it as a line in the sand, because I know, and I sort of speaking for myself here, I suppose, that knowing that, okay, when I log off on Christmas Eve or whatever day it might be, I am done for the year. And there's something about that which means that during my break, I feel a sense of detachment from work that I might not experience in April to May, if that makes sense. And so finding the balance between understanding that it's just the next month and that it's okay, and not to force yourself to do everything and create this, overwhelming January list, but equally working towards a sense of accomplishment and finality for that last day of leave. So it's kind of finding that balance, I think.
I think those principles apply to any type of leave. So I would always advocate for people and leaders, because basically we're all the same, to make sure you set your leave up for success. So turn off the notifications. So I do this now. I turn off my Gmail notifications so I don't get email notifications. I'll turn off my Slack notifications. Turn it off on your phone unless you need to be contacted in an emergency. So I say to my team, if they need me in an emergency, ring me or text message me, because I always have that on. But the other work stuff I'll turn off, because otherwise you don't get to separate. And if you don't get to separate, you never actually get proper recovery time. So that applies to any kind of leave. The other thing I think it's important when you're on leave, and also this time of year, is a really good opportunity to reflect. Reflect on the year. What have you achieved that you're proud of? What worked well, what didn't work well? And maybe even set some goals or intentions for the next year. So I've got girlfriends of mine, we've been doing this for a long time. We pick a word of next year, like what do we want to focus on? And we put a couple of goals around, and we do it in a very funny, kind of silly way, but we set some intentions. So the end of the year is a really good time to reflect, to learn, and to think about what you want to achieve next year. Now, already I know next year I want to do less than this year. So in order for me to do that, I have to work smarter, not harder, because I'm already working too hard. So I want to figure out ways of doing that. So I've started thinking about, what can I do for my calendar? Where can I allocate time? How do I tweak my business planning process for my team? So I'm already starting, and in the holidays, I've carved out a couple of days to go, right, let me think about that. So 2 practices I would encourage everyone to do over the holidays: turn off notifications from your devices if you can. If you're a skeleton staff, obviously you can't. Hopefully your organization has put someone on skeleton staff if they're still working over the break. Turn off your notifications, reflect on the year and what you're proud of and what you've learned. And number 3, start to think about how you're setting yourself up for next year. What is important to you? How are you going to work effectively? What goals do you want to achieve for the end of the year? And I'm going to throw a 4th in there, because I've got 4 fingers up, is find ways to rest and recharge. Find ways to refill batteries, because otherwise you'll come back and your future me will not only have too much work, but it won't be rested enough to actually do the work. So you've got to find time to rest and relax.
Which does bring us to our next question, which we talked a little bit about yesterday or the other day when we had our briefing session ahead of this webinar, was around the different types of rest. And a lot of this kind of stems from prioritizing the time and space for self-reflection and self-awareness and intentionality. But I think we talked about how there's 7 types of rest and the importance of having, that self-awareness. And as you lead into that opportunity to have some downtime, assuming everyone does have at least a few days for some rest of some type, because we think that rest might sort of, first of all, as a culture, Western culture, we don't celebrate or prioritize rest. We don't understand how important it is, and we don't reward it. We don't think it's important. We think it's, we associate things like laziness to rest. And we might, we think of rest as like slumping on the couch or sleep.
Yeah.
But actually there's a lot more to rest, and there's lots of different types of rest. So can you talk a little bit to that, and what are the different types of rest, and how might you be able to identify what you need?
Yeah, and I would think about it in terms of recovery rather than rest, because you're so right. We value busyness and hecticness, and we devalue slowing down and recovering, right? So it's like we're losers and we failed if we have to recover. Believe it from the one who burnt out. So, take my advice. I would definitely start to call it recovery. That's what I've started calling it. And there's different ways, to your point, Steph, we were talking about. So for many, many years, I thought the only way to rest and recover was to sleep and to meditate. Because if you look at a lot of the literature on well-being and a lot of the wellness kind of stuff, they talk about sleep, they talk about eating healthy, they talk about exercising, they talk about meditation and mindfulness. That's kind of a lot of the research and a lot of the literature. You go, okay, well, that's what I need to do. I did all of that, right? And none of it really made a massive difference. Meditation's good and it's very helpful, and I've gone back to doing it again. And of course, you need to exercise and eat well. I call that just the mattress. Like, that's your foundation. That's your mattress, so you can bounce. When things are hectic, you can bounce. And if you've got a solid mattress, you're going to be able to bounce off that mattress back to where you need to be. So I call it the mattress effect. Keep that mattress nice and solid rather than a saggy one that you'll end up with a sore back. So that's a mattress effect. But what I discovered was there's different types of rest and recovery that work really well. So, for example, for me, it's reading. Reading is the only thing that will actually turn my brain off because I'm focused on something else. So the best recovery gets your brain and body into a different state. So for me, it's reading. For some people, it's watching movies. For some people, it's hiking. It might be swimming. It might be like extreme sports. Some people love crafts, like arts and crafts, but it's whatever gets you into that zone where your brain is in a different space. That actually is rest. So I have realized over the last couple of years that if I don't have a book with me and I don't get a couple of hours of reading in on the weekend, then I'm going to be not a great state the following week. I'm going to be tired. I'm going to like I'm dragging myself through the mud, because that is the way that my brain gets recovery. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about rest and recovery. You need your brain to get rest and recovery, so your body can get rest and recovery. So while you're on this call, maybe just take a minute to have a think about it. What is it that you do that at the end of that, you're like, oh, I feel recharged. I feel like I've, because that's the thing that you want to do during the holidays. And as a leader, what you should be doing is asking your team the same questions. And again, lead by example. So I've said this to my team. We do every Monday morning, we do a check-in. What did you do on your weekend? And I now make a point of saying, I did this and this, and it gave me a time to recover, or it gave me time to rest, or it gave me downtime, whatever it is. But I make a point of saying that to the team regularly now, so they realize that downtime is important. And then if the CEO is doing downtime, maybe they should be doing some downtime. So that's important, but it's not one size fits all when it comes to rest and recovery. So find what it is that works for you. For my partner, he likes getting out there and doing kind of sports, right? So he'll play soccer, he'll go sailing, he'll run around, he'll do that sort of stuff. He likes to watch war movies. I hate war movies. So I'll lie around reading with my music on while he's watching war movies. So you know, it's different things for different people, and that's okay. You've got to find what's good for you.
Yeah. And potentially different things at different periods, right? So at sometimes of my life, I'm a bit like you, where reading is that way where there's no screen, but it's full escapism. And so it feels very restful and recharging. But then also there's something about, just feeling like I need to not be in the city. I need to be near the ocean. And that is how, and at different times, ideally, I'm by the ocean reading a book.
I was going to say, it magnifies.
Work well together.
Yeah.
But yeah, and sometimes you might, like I said before, you might need, I think it was before, maybe it was in our conversation, where you might really be craving and needing, and like, your body might be really needing that family time, just time with your family. And other times you might really need some space from your family, and that is okay. So it's always about sort of checking in with what you need at any particular time. And it will vary. And sometimes you don't know what you need until you do it. I know a few years ago, I worked in wellbeing in a different organisation, and we would come together similar to you and talk about what we did on the weekend, particularly what focused on what filled our wellbeing cup over the weekend. And I sort of learned that having the ability to be spontaneous on the weekends and not having an overly diarised calendar was really important for my sense of wellbeing, the where I could still do things, but it would be, oh, I feel like going to the cafe and whatever, or going to the art gallery or going to a movie, as opposed to going, I have breakfast, lunch and dinner booked in, for the entire weekend. Whereas other more extroverted people would love that. So learning
Yeah.
about what you need can take time and experience. So, but coming back to the workplace for a moment, because I think we were talking a little bit today about leaders and role modeling, but a lot about that sort of personal reflection and personal well-being. I know that there are lots of individuals and lots of leaders who might feel like saying, well, I don't have a lot of say over my workload, or I don't have a lot of control, which is valid too, of course. I mean, that we know that there's some of this is not going to work for everybody as well. It depends on the industry you work in, and it might feel a bit blue sky thinking for some. But look, I'm also just going to skip over a question for a moment, just in the interest of time, so we have got some time at the end to hear from everybody on the webinar today. I'm interested in what you've seen with your clients and in your work to help improve performance without burning people out, because I think we talk a lot in our industry about bringing your whole self to work, and we want to have high performance culture, but we also really want to avoid burnout. We want to support people in their well-being. Can you tell me a bit about what you've seen with your clients and in your work, how you can improve performance without burning people out?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think on the call, people you've dialed in today, people on the call, because you're interested in well-being, or you work in well-being or safety. So it's like we're preaching to the converted. You have said, yes, this is important. But for the majority of workplaces and the majority of leaders, they don't A, get it, or don't know how to do it. B is what we've found, right? It's that particularly with the legislation changing, people are really scared of getting this wrong because there are legal consequences. So we link well-being to performance, because without one, you can't have the other. And so what we do is we work with organizations in a number of different ways. We have a whole lot of solutions. We have self-reported ways. We have AI ways that we can do things in a non-disruptive sense. We have programs that we run, and we focus on uplifting performance by reducing people risk, and specifically reducing burnout. And that combination has worked really well for leaders and businesses, because they can see a commercial outcome. So first advice to wellbeing leaders on the call, you always want to link what you're doing to a commercial outcome. Productivity links to revenue, it links to commercial outcomes. So the work we've done with customers has been really interesting. We've helped one organization that we worked with create a space for deep work. So their productivity was being challenged because they couldn't foresee issues coming, and they couldn't get enough space to actually do the deep work. So we work with them on putting practices and processes in place to create deep work for their people, and they saw their productivity and their flow state improve by 12% in 6 months. It was a significant improvement there. Another organization was really pushing very hard to get people back into the office, and so we started working with them. We did our self-reporting assessment, and we put the AI in to understand what was happening sort of subtly. And what we realized is that people didn't want to come back to the office. I mean, that might not be a surprise to a lot of people on this call, but what they needed was better connection to the leaders and better connection to each other. So we've now been running programs for them, introducing delegation, introducing grow coaching, and then measuring that with the AI to understand the impact on the team. And that's really helped them significantly improve their performance, whilst also helping reduce their rent, because they moved from a really big office to a smaller office because they didn't need all those extra desks. So we've had a good, strong commercial outcome. So they're the kind of things we've been doing with organizations. And it actually is about uplifting people's mental wellness and mental capacity, and then linking it to strong business outcomes. So And yeah, we're doing a lot in the change space as well. So we see organizational change as, and we all know this, as one of the key hazards. Actually, one of the key psychosocial hazards is poor organizational change. So we're actually now doing a lot of work with organizations on implementing a change framework, which we've developed called ADAPT. And the AI measures the effectiveness of change on the creation of stress and the improvement of wellbeing and productivity. So that's been a really nice way to help organizations improve performance without actually saying, oh, we've got to do all this wellbeing work, because they go, yeah, as I'm sure a lot of you know, but they achieve their change outcomes. So we're like, here's, you can achieve your change outcomes by doing this, using the AI. So it means it's non-disruptive, it's sitting in the background, it's fully private and confidential, it's all ethical and responsible, and it's helping managers create practices and processes and measuring those to understand the impact. And people are like, yes, this is the stuff that we want to do. So we feel like we're making some good inroads because we've tied that well-being to performance and actual outcomes.
I think that's so important. We talk about burnout or well-being in particular, and you can lose some people just by using that word. But when you make it very clearly linked to performance, productivity, and bottom line, suddenly ears are pricking up, which they should anyway. But, we know everybody's motivated slightly differently. The first time you and I met earlier this year, actually, when you were talking to me about Pioneera, and you mentioned that, performance is well-being. They are the same thing. There is no performance without good well-being. And it's sort of like, if you know with that concept. Some people and some leaders, unfortunately, are still trying to sort of understand that concept that, it's not about performance or well-being, or productivity or well-being. They are inherently the same. You cannot have productive workers who have got poor well-being. It just doesn't work that way. So framing it in that way and focusing on change and, the bottom line is really important.
Well, I think
sorry, you go.
Sorry, Steph. One thing I would say is you can actually have productive workers with low well-being, but they will only be productive for a short period of time. And this is the difference. This is what we're trying to say to people. Sure. Yeah, you drive for more and more work. So you look at activity and task as a measure of productivity, and you go, yeah, that person's, oh my God, they're so productive because they're working 10 hours a day. That is not sustainable, as we all know. So what we want to create sustainable productivity and help leaders do the skills, like Jamie's talking about being calm and having situational awareness. So important, Jamie, because calmness and grit put together is super important for leaders. So I think that's really important. And also the being able to survive so Sam's talking about surviving extreme work overload this year. Really important, Sam, because grit, as I said, is a key thing about great leaders. And I'd love to see you next year thinking about not just how you're surviving, but how you're thriving in that kind of environment. So something to think about next year. How do you move from surviving to thriving? And again, we can chat about that. Can I make one comment? Sorry, Steph, before we go on to the question, because Kerry's just asked, can I explain the AI measures and can I explain deep dive? Do I have 2 minutes to do that?
Yes, you do. Yeah.
So deep work, Julianne, is when people actually need that quiet time alone to be able to get into something that requires a lot of thinking, a lot of planning, or a high mental load. And that's what we consider deep work. So you might be writing a report, you might be creating a new spreadsheet, whatever you're doing, but you require no interruptions to be able to get that work. So that's considered deep work. And this company, because they were in the office together all the time, actually had a lot of trouble getting into that deep space. So there's things we did with them. So again, happy to talk separately. Kerry, the AI measures are actually, so the AI component uses language to understand someone's mental state. So it works a little bit like a spell checker. Once you've given the system permission, uses the language that you use in everyday chat, so Microsoft Teams or Slack, just to understand how you're doing mentally. How is your well-being tracking? How is your productivity tracking? How is your stress tracking? And then we have a digital coach. So the app is called Coach Indy, and then Indy digitally coaches you to help improve your well-being. So you can, in the moment when you need that little bit of boost of well-being, or if you're doing super well and you want some reinforcement, that's when Coach Indy pops up and says, hey, you're doing really well, keep doing what you're doing. Or consider doing something else. So that's the way that the AI works. It's not obtrusive, so you don't have to answer any questions. You don't have to do anything. You're just sitting there working away, and you've got kind of like a buddy there with you to help you get the most out of yourself, and then the most, obviously, performance for your organization as well. And it's 100% confidential and private to you. Your manager doesn't say anything. It's just you and your buddy, Indy.
It's also what's so great about it is, which you mentioned, is that it doesn't rely on the individual to be aware, or be, often as we are approaching burnout, we get less aware of what we need, and we start to sort of we're in that fight or flight. We're not able to problem solve, or to really see what's the expression, to see through the see the
forest for the
or
trees.
something. Anyway, thank you.
You can't, and you don't know where to get
so
help.
Instead of,
Yeah.
So instead of relying on either a co-worker or a leader to identify that for you, or you identify it yourself, it's like there's something happening in the background, and we'll bring it to your attention, so that you start to realize where you're at, which is really important, because I know myself and colleagues and people I know who, the more stress we get, the less aware of that sort of level of stress we become almost. It unfortunately works against us in that way.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of minutes for any other questions. Sorry, Dan.
No, I was just going to say, it's like psychologically, we know that's the case. So the unconscious bias that we talk about in terms of gender and culture and stuff, discrimination in the workplace, also applies to ourselves. So we actually don't see it until something happens. So that's why you need a third party to be able to support you in that, particularly as you get more and more stressed. Yes, it becomes harder and harder.
Yes. I'm just having a quick little squiz through the chat. If anybody has any other questions. I noticed that we do have staff wellbeing in secondary schools. Julianne, from there, I know education can be a particularly challenging space and industry, whether you're a teacher or otherwise. Not having that sort of flexibility and a choice of where you work, and there's other components. So first of all, hats off to teachers and anyone working in education or any kind of higher risk or higher stress environments like that. It's harder again when you don't have as much say over, job control around the work design and all the other things you have to do in your downtime and in your holidays, the work you have to do. So shout out to education. I can also see Jamie mentioning working in a maximum security prison, which is a very interesting environment, I'm sure, in terms of psychosocial hazards and occupational violence and various things. And those daily check-ins with my team is essential both for safety, of course, but also, own wellbeing and situational awareness. So I think a lot of what we've talked about today, one of my reflections is really about carving out the space to take some time to reflect on your own, with your team, with your leader. It's really about having that self-awareness and carving out the time and space to do that self-awareness and do that reflecting, whether that's individually or collectively. It's really important. I don't think there's any other specific questions.
No, I think probably the only thing I would just say is that I think, absolutely shout out to teachers and education. You guys are doing really important and really difficult work. I've got a lot of friends in the education sector. I think there are some things that we can do to support teachers and secondary schools and higher education a little bit more. And I think there's definitely about workload, but obviously we're preaching to the converted there. But I do think there's some practices that we can start to put into place, like daily check-ins and a few things like that I think, if you're not already doing, sort of help, because one of the key things about well-being and safety is connection. It's connection to the leader, but it's connection to peers and connection to colleagues, to feel that people are supported and they're part of a greater whole, because purpose becomes really important when you get to this. Purpose, curiosity, they're kind of the things that we see good leaders and great leaders do really well, specifically as you're trying to implement any change into an organization. So I do think that's something to consider. Again, happy to chat separately offline about that, but that's some of the stuff that we've seen work well in secondary schools, because it's very difficult to get a break these days because parents are on you all the time. So something to have a think about in that environment.
I also just see Di mentioning with a mixed work group, the ability to interpret and acknowledge the different levels of understanding of wellness has become an issue. And that's a really good point. I've been reading a bit about how leaders are becoming more and more this sort of, dumping ground for people's gripes, and what one person, different levels of resilience and different sort of self-awareness practices, what one person might get really overwhelmed by, a different person might not. It's a very personal experience. And, there's many factors, although I know that the World Health Organization defines burnout as being a sort of workplace phenomenon. I would sort of push back against that and say there's all kinds of factors that build up to experiencing burnout. But work is obviously one of an important and significant factor there as well.
Yeah.
It's really hard. I think, ideally a work environment is set up so that leaders do have the time and space to have those one-on-one check-ins, right, with all their staff, to get to know what they need in an individual way. But that's not always the case. So it is very, very difficult and makes it more challenging. Creating a universal language around burnout and well-being can be helpful, so that there's that sort of understanding and a base level of literacy through things like training and education. Did you want to say something else, Dan, about that?
Yeah, I was just going to say two things. I think that where we see burnout really escalate is where work and home collide. So work is busy, home something happens, or vice versa, right? If one's busy and one's okay, you can usually manage. But that's where we see things collide. So something to keep in mind. I think the other thing, Di, absolutely, what I wanted to say before is that we all know well-being because we're on this call, but a lot of people don't. So you've kind of got to meet people where they're at. And so that's why I don't talk about well-being that much. I said to Steph yesterday, I don't like the word self-care. To me, it feels super indulgent. So if anyone comes to me with self-care, I'm like, oh, come on. So different language is going to work for different people, and it's okay for people to be at different levels, because some people will not care. We go into organizations, they're like, I don't care about well-being, I've got this in hand, and clearly they're stressed through the roof. So you can't ever force anyone to take this on. I think the opportunity is for you to share and lead by example, and for those that are comfortable to talk about well-being or to talk about how they, get healthy. There's different ways you can do it, how you get healthy, how you, all of that sort of stuff, maintain your energy. That would be maybe something to consider in your group, because you've got different levels of understanding and probably different levels of acceptance, right? Some people want to take it on, some don't. So just have a think about that, and also have a think about the other things that create well-being, that create well-being, that you don't have to kind of talk openly about. Like I said, my check-in, we talk about the weekend, what have you done? And we talk deliberately about things that aren't work, because A, I want to get to know people, but B, I want people to feel that they can have those conversations that are not just work conversations. So something to consider in your particular group. The other thing I wanted to say is that we believe, like, my background is large scale transformation. So I spent 30 years, I say 25 plus because it doesn't make me feel so old, but 30 years essentially running large scale transformation programs. And I know implementing well-being, implementing safety in organizations is a change. It's a transformation. So I'd really encourage you all to think about it like that. How are we trying to go from very little or a little well-being, however much well-being you have, to more? I'm guessing you want more, or I'm guessing you at least want to sustain it so it doesn't drop. To go from A to B is a change by definition in every sense of the word. So start to have a think about it. How would I apply these change principles? Again, we have practices and processes that we can help you with, but how do I apply these change principles? Excuse me, sorry, I've got a sniffle. And how do I make sure that I can go from step A to step B to step C? Because if you try and jump in at step C, which is you try and get everyone to start doing well-being practices, like you throw a meditation at people at the beginning of a meeting, they're just going to go, what the hell? You've got to start at step A, take them to step B, take them to step C. So have a think about that. It's a journey, and you'll get there eventually. Just follow the path.
Great advice. I'm going to wrap things up now because we've just gone 1 minute over. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. A couple of final last comments. It can be really hard, as you've just been talking about, Dan, where to know where and what to invest time and money and energy in. So if you'd like to find out more about what SuperFriend can offer, we have a lot of really amazing free resources. We have a wonderful diagnostic tool. And if your workplace is with one of our partner super funds, you can actually get this one for free, which is usually in the thousands. So please check it out. I know that Pioneera also have a working group focused on change. So there'll be a link to all these things in both in the chat now and also in our follow-up EDM, which will be going out tomorrow with the recording for this session. And please, if you can spare a moment to fill out the survey with feedback for this session and all of our sessions. We really appreciate the feedback so we know how to curate some great topics and sessions for you for next year. But thank you so much, Danielle. It's been wonderful chatting to you. I've learned a lot and I'm going to take some time to reflect on it. And yeah, we'll be in touch soon. Have a wonderful, warm afternoon.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you, everyone.